our today's. As you know, the Polish-Portuguese Chamber of Commerce since last year has started to play a proactive role in terms of linking Polish and Portuguese real estate companies, individuals and corporate companies, in terms of promoting and passing the know-how on how to invest in Portugal, a country that has been a quite popular destination for Polish private and corporate investments, having in mind its safeness, having in mind very pleasant climate and modern bureaucracy. We foresee a series of webinars that will deepen the subject. Today's session is first of them. And by saying this, I would like to present our speakers. First of all, Mr. Rogério Fernandes Ferreira, who is a founder and managing partner of RFF Advogados, a long-time member company of the Polish-Portuguese Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, Rogério. Rogério is a professor of tax law at the University of Lisbon and at the Catholic University of Portugal, a former Secretary of State for Tax Affairs in Portugal. So I don't see any better speaker for covering today's subject. On the other side, I'm glad to present Mr. Roberto Castro Mendonça, a lawyer at NEWCO, a Portuguese one-stop shop for individuals and companies wanting to establish themselves in Portugal, including Madeira, a very popular destination for Poles. And both gentlemen will cover two relevant subjects. First of all, the subject of tax regime for non-habitual resident, NHR, covered by Rogério. And later, know-how about acquiring real estate in Portugal. That is, what do we need to know in terms of procedures, in terms of taxation, in terms of rentals, and taxes on the sale of real estate in Portugal. We are foreseeing a 60-minute session that will finish with Q&A at your end. I would like to ask all the Polish participants to keep your microphones muted so we can have a pleasant listening to the presentations, and later on we will be open for any questions that might arise. So thank you very much for being present, and I would like to give the voice to Mr. Rogério Fernandes Ferreira for his speech and presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wojciech. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to participate in this seminar with you and with the Chamber, and also with Roberto, a close friend, and with whom we speak about all these tax issues. So you asked me to clarify some aspects of this special tax regime known as the non-habitual tax resident regime. It has more than 10 years now. It's coming from 2009. It was revised in 2013. So there is experience and expertise on this issue here in Portugal. At the same time, we can compare it with some of others that we can find in other countries, in UK, in Greece, in Italy, or in Spain. As far as I know, and I think we could say that we have a much more interesting tax regime for high net worth individuals. I will try to explain you why. First of all, I think it's important just a minute to just important to say that the Portuguese governments from the right and from the left wings for many years that are trying to solve two of the most important problems that we have here in Portugal. One is old population, and the other one is lack of capital. We have a huge public debt, and we have old people living in Portugal. So these two main issues, immigration, attracting capital and foreigners to Portugal, is really an issue in Portugal, and also it's a kind of national strategy, for different parties and from different governments, from the left and from the right wings. The fact is, first of all, I think that Portugal is a good choice, of course, not only because we have a specific tax regime, a special tax regime called the non-habitual tax residence regime that I'm going to explain you how it works. But there are some errors different from tax that we should point out, that I let you hear as Portugal as a good choice. We have a very competitive cost of living. It's easy to compare the real estate prices that Roberto is going to speak about in different capitals in Europe. We should compare it with Paris, with Spain, with London, with Berlin. There is a competitive cost of living, including real estate prices. We can find here a favorable regulatory environment. On the Global Peace Index, we are in the 6th position. So it's Portugal is really a very safe country. It's considered the 3rd best country for quality of life for expatriates. There are several programs, including this tax one, to encourage foreign investment in Portugal. You can find here some tech industries like Google, Uber, or Tesla. Portugal is also highly ranked by the World Bank for ease of doing business, considered as one of the most attractive countries for foreign direct investment. And we also have, thinking about third countries, different visas to come to Europe. Maybe at the end of this conference or this presentation, you will have an idea about why Portugal is this good way in, a good door to Portugal. Well, just a minute. The first question that we have, it's what is a non-habitual tax resident? First of all, a non-habitual tax resident is a tax resident, a normal tax resident, like me or Roberto, that we are living here and we are tax residents. So a non-habitual tax resident is a tax resident with a specific tax regime that grants him some tax benefits. Well, so the first point to point out is that a non-habitual tax resident should be tax resident in Portugal and should request the specific tax regime. Well, the Portuguese law says that it should be requested until the 31st of March of the following year. Nevertheless, just to let you know that there are some people who didn't do it on time, that there are some decisions of the tax arbitral court that decides that in fact, if we did not ask it, will not be a real condition to grant the tax benefits coming from this specific tax status. But a non-habitual tax resident, it's a tax resident who request this specific tax status until the 31st of March, and that was not before, during the last 5 years, a tax resident in Portugal. So he was a non-habitual tax resident on the prior 5 years, and that becomes a new tax resident in Portugal. So he has to be considered tax resident in Portugal by the Portuguese rules that I let you hear. Just 1 or 2 points about this. The most important issue here is the abode. So we have to, if you want to become a tax resident, you have to live in Portugal. These 183 days that the Portuguese tax law is speaking about is a presumption of tax resident, which means that you can stay in Portugal more than 183 days and not be considered a tax resident, and you can be less than 183 days and be considered as tax resident in Portugal. But the condition to become a non-habitual tax resident is to become tax resident in Portugal and not being a tax resident during the last five years. So the request should be done until the 31st of March of the following year, and it will grant these tax benefits during a period of 10 years. Surely that you have this question, is it renewable? It is not renewable. It's justified because it's a temporary period, but nevertheless, if you fulfill the 2 main conditions again, you can ask it again. Meaning, if you go out of Portugal during 5 years and return to Portugal and request it again, you will fulfill these 2 conditions, not being a tax resident during the last 5 years and become a new tax resident. You can ask it 2 times, 3 times, if you fulfill these 2 conditions. But it is not renewable, and it is justified because it's a temporary regime. Well, the benefits that we can get from this non-habitual tax resident regime depend of the source of the income, of the source. When this tax resident, which the most important benefits are these ones. Most of the income coming from outside of Portugal will be exempted of personal income tax. So foreign source income will be after getting this tax regime will be tax exempt of the personal income tax. This includes salaries. These also include fees for self-employment. This includes any kind of capital income, meaning bank interests, dividends, royalties. It also includes rental income, capital gains on immovable property, but also pensions. The pensions were exempted for the non-habitual tax residents that requested this tax regime until March of 2020. So these non-habitual tax residents that requested this tax regime until March of 2020, they are also exempted of personal income tax, what we call ERS, in Portugal for this period of 10 years. For the others that requested it after March of 2020, they are not exempted, but they have a 20% flat rate that on the pensions that they receive from outside of Portugal. I'm going to speak to you a little about our network of tax treaties, but as immigrants that the Portuguese are, in fact, almost all the countries, with all the states with which we sign tax treaties have a specific clause on pensions that says that it's the state of the residency that has the exclusivity of the taxation. So when this flex is the inverse, that people are coming to Portugal, of course it's Portugal that has the exclusivity of taxation on pension, which means that before 2020, before March of 2020, these habitual tax residents, which are not taxed in Portugal as the state of their residency, are also not taxed at the source, at the state country of the source of the pension. Of course, with this, it arises a political issue in some countries, namely in Sweden and Finland. And one day, Finland and Sweden denounced the tax treaty signed by Portugal. I'm going to speak to you a little about this. I have a slide for that. But what is important to point out is that the income coming from outside of Portugal will be almost all exempted in Portugal. Exempted, will not pay the personal income tax that we call the ERS. And it includes almost all the income, including pensions, but excluding what we call capital gains on movable property. So the rule here is that on bonds or on shares, we will find a flat rate with a flat rate of 28%. This exemption, of course, will be granted during this period of 10 years. Just another point about this period of 10 years, that this period can be suspended, which means that if one day you think to go out from Portugal to Italy, to Thailand, to any other place, you can suspend this tax regime during 1, 2, 3 years. And if you return back to Portugal, it is also granted these tax salaries, these tax benefits until the end of this 10 years period. On the Portuguese source income, so meaning for Portuguese clients for an activity in Portugal, on employment and self-employment income, we will find a flat rate of 20% also during this period of 10 years. The condition is to be an activity included in a list that we called the high added value list of activities. It's a very large list that I will also let you hear the main issues. It's a large list. It's not so difficult to include the activity here. It includes directors, managers, dentists, doctors, engineers, etc. I will let you hear. But it's this situation of being included in this list of high valued activity list that grants this flat rate of 20% on the employment and self-employment income from Portugal. Well, just a word about our network of double tax treaties. just to say, if this tax regime it's an unilateral and national tax regime that grants some benefits at the state of the residency, at the source, we should think about this network of tax treaties. If you count them, you will find that we have, I think, 79 tax treaties signed by Portugal during the last, I would say, 25 years. What is important to know is that it covers all the Portuguese-speaking countries without any exception. The last one was with Angola. It also covers all the European countries without exception, including, well, Sweden and Finland, but with the problem that I have just told you. But it includes almost all the OECD countries. So it's interesting, and it's the conjugation of this non-habitual tax resident regime with this network of double tax treaties, with the European directives, and with some other tax sellers and others, including the visas that I'm going just to let you a word, that is the reasons why Portugal is really a good way in Europe. It doesn't interest you so much, but just to let you a word that we have different visas for people coming from third countries. These visas are authorization permits for people coming from third countries, Canada, United States, etc. The most common is, in fact, the Golden Visa program that will change next days. But it will not change so much because this Golden Visa, I think that Roberto is going to speak a little about, because it has something about the real estate. The option of the real estate is the one that it's going to finish well in some days. But there are some other options of investment, and the Golden Visa is still an option, namely on investment funds, etc. But we have different visas, not only the Golden Visa. So I let you just hear this passive income visa that is known as the D7 visa, which is a two-step process residence permit with the residency visa and with the residence permit. In fact, it's for people, for citizens that intend to relocate to Portugal and that will be able to be supported by themselves, that will not need the Portuguese state for that. All visas has this possibility of family reunification. As many other countries, we have other visas, like this startup visa for startups, and also a digital nomad visa. So I will pass now the voice and the word to Roberto. Thank you for your patience, but I think this was the most important items that I think I should point out to you. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Rogério. That was really great, as always. I will share my screen and start my quick presentation also. So happy to be here once again. It was a pleasure sharing the floor with Rogério, such a great friend and one of our best tax specialists, if not the best. So it's really great to join forces with the Chamber of Commerce. For us at NEWCO, it's obviously a great opportunity. We are a company that provides services in mainland Portugal, but specifically also in Madeira. our beautiful island in the middle of the Atlantic. And here today, I'm going to guide you through some of the steps, legal steps, but just the basics, the very basics, and also tax as of acquired in Portugal. The real estate market in Portugal, as you know, is very, very competitive nowadays. Although it will suffer what, well, specialists would have the word on, but it might suffer an adjustment further to new golden visa rules. As many of you might know, the golden visa option through the acquisition of real estate is going to end in just a few days. There will be plenty of other options for golden visa, which is mainly for the ones that don't want to relocate to Portugal or don't want to become tax residents of Portugal. But there will be other options for golden visas, such as acquiring units in real estate investment funds. But the real estate component is being completely terminated. But here we are going to address the legal and tax aspects for those that still want to buy a property in Portugal, and which I believe will continue being very, very successful path and very successful option for investments. So on this very first slide, I outline some steps that are mandatory to buy a property in Portugal. The first one is to obtain a Portuguese tax ID, which it's commonly referred to as NIF, the Portuguese acronym. This is used for registration purposes, but also for the noble intent of charging you taxes. This number is inserted in the registration papers of the property and will be used to charge you transfer taxes and property taxes throughout the ownership of the asset. Then this is becoming this is not as mandatory, let's say, as it was in the past. But in case you're not a resident of the EU or the A, you may have to appoint a tax representative. Further to a legislative amendment of last year, you can now alternatively adhere to one of the digital notification platforms that the tax authorities provide. But still, what we have been experiencing is that, considering that the tax representative is, let's say, your point of contact and your connection with the tax authorities, meaning that the tax representative receives the letters addressed from the tax authorities, most of our clients, although it's no longer mandatory, still prefer to have a tax representative, which is, for instance, a service that we NEWCO provide. Then number three, it's a promissory contract. It's something very typical in Portugal. So basically, on the promissory contract, once you choose a property, you make a down payment, usually 10% or 20%, and you make like a reservation of such property. This is what we call the promissory contract, and it's like the first step, the first formal step for the acquisition of the asset. And usually in a couple of months or even less, you go to the deed. This is not mandatory, but it's, I would say, what happens in most transactions. Then we start paying taxes. The RET is a real estate transfer tax, and the stamp duty is a tax that is due from the transfer of real estate too. I will speak about them in more further detail in a minute. These are paid typically one day before, or even on the date or the moment of the deed of sale, which is number 5. And they are calculated in a way that I will explain in a few moments. The deed of sale is something, well, that probably is done also in your country of origin, in Poland. And it's before the Portuguese notary. And, well, as from the deed of sale, you are officially the owner of the property, and you have all the registration papers under your name. All of this, from number 1 to number 5, can be done either physically, so once you are in Portugal and on the very same moment, or it can be done through a power of attorney. For instance, here at NEWCO, we have a buyer's agent department, whereby typically clients come to Madeira or even to mainland Portugal, they search for several properties. In case they choose a property, and considering that we have all these administrative procedures to take care of, they can go ahead with the purchase of the property by means of a power of attorney, and typically an advisor will take care of all of that. One point that I believe it's relevant is that, although not mandatory, it's advisable when purchasing a property in Portugal to appoint a lawyer or a Portuguese specialist, because it's always advisable not only to review the promissory contract, but also to review the paperwork of the property. So whether the property has some mortgage on it, whether the property is duly registered, whether the taxes over the property were paid, because in case you haven't paid, for instance, real estate transfer tax, the property can be used by the Portuguese state to enforce such payment, and hence it's important to ensure that you have your rights covered and that everything is in place with the assets. So now we start with this very first tax that is paid upon the acquisition of the property. As the name says, it's real estate transfer tax, and the Portuguese acronym is IMT or EMT. And it's a transfer tax that is due over the tax value or the purchase price of the property. Typically, the value that is used for this is the purchase price, because it's a lot higher than the tax value. The tax value is something that is calculated through a fixed formula provided by the tax authorities, and is usually well below the Portuguese, well below the market standard. The rate will depend on several aspects, as I mentioned here. It will be like the type of property, the price, the location. The price, because the rates are progressive, it can go up to 7.5% to transactions above around 1 million in Portuguese mainland, and around 1.3 million in the autonomous regions. So basically, in the autonomous regions such as Madeira, you pay less, or at least the highest rates of IMT is triggered on a higher step of the chain. So it depends on the price because the rate is progressive. The type of property, so if it's rural or urban, if it's used for residential purposes or not. So if it's for a permanent dwelling of someone, or if it's an office, or if it's a store in the shopping center, or if it's a logistics park, it's the rates may change. And the location, as I said, because of the different thresholds for the autonomous regions. There is a fixed 6.5 rate, so it's not progressive, it's fixed on the sale of urban properties which are not exclusively of residential nature. So as I said, stores and office, for instance, and a flat rate of 5% for rural properties. So basically, I start by, in this slide that we will provide you, I start by outlining what can impact the rate, and then I explain in the following which will be the differences. Then we have here an interesting provision, which is the aggravated rate that applies in case the buyer is resident in a tax haven. So Portuguese has a huge list of blacklisted jurisdictions, including the United Arab Emirates and other usual suspects such as Cayman, the Channel Islands, etc. And so in case the buyer is resident in such jurisdiction, the rates are usually aggravated, on this case to 10%. There are some exemptions of real estate transfer tax. These exemptions are, of course, very attractive because we are speaking of an impact that can go up to 7.5% on the purchase price. I would highlight the urban rehabilitation exemption. This is subject to strict requirements. So basically the assets must have more than 30 years, must be located in a urban rehabilitation area, and other procedural aspects that would take us one more webinar to address. But basically, in case you are eligible for this rehabilitation, you can be exempt from real estate transfer tax on the acquisition and on the first resale. And also you can be exempt of property tax for 3 years, which is, of course, very attractive for these transactions, because, well, rehabilitation is something very popular in the city centers, particularly in Portugal, because we had cities that were not in a good state, and this was used mainly to foster those urban rehabilitation procedures. Then we have stamp duty. Stamp duty is relatively straightforward. It's 0.8% over the purchase price or the tax value again. Well, typically it will be over the purchase price for the reasons I explained. And it's, 0.8% fixed, regardless of the amount. Even if it's 1 million, it will be 0.8%. If it's a 10K investment, it will be 0.8%. Then once you pay these two taxes, you will be officially the owner of the property, and you will have annually the obligation of paying municipal property tax. In the Portuguese acronym, it's IMI. IMI is payable basically by whoever is the owner of the property on the 31st of December of each year. There are different tax rates that apply depending on whether the property is urban, rural, or, once again, aggravated rates for a residence in tax haven. And it's paid in May, August, and November of each year in 3 equal installments. There is a growing trend, I will say, for municipalities charging the minimum IMI that is foreseen by the law. So basically, municipalities are entitled to charge between 0.3 and 0.45%. Due to political strategies, or even to address the housing crisis, there is a growing number of municipalities that kind of accept to charge a minimum IMI and charge 0.3%. So this is typically the case of several, the autonomous region of Madeira, the case of several municipalities. This is a municipal tax. So there is a discretion for the municipalities can exercise. And for urban properties, they can weigh in pros and cons of charging 0.3 or charging maximum 0.45, having the ability of charging whatever they want between these two. Then there is the additional to the IMI. This may sound a bit weird for those that are not tax specialists, or even not familiar with the Portuguese tax system. But this was created. I wouldn't say that it's a luxury tax, but it's for properties that have a huge tax value or a significant tax value. There was in the old days a stamp duty, a special stamp duty rate that applied to properties with a tax value of above 1 million. That was considered illegal, so the government basically created this additional to the IMI, and it applies over a formula that I explained on this slide, that takes into account the tax value of the properties that each individual will have, and over that residual value that are applied. So will only to properties that are very valuable, and circumstances that, once again, will. But I just want to be aware for high value properties with high value, there, apart from the IMI, the additional IMI rate to the rate I explained, which can be of 0.7 for a taxable value of 1 million% for a rate higher, and of 1% for a taxable value above 1 million. For companies, this IME is always of 0.5%, and there is an exemption for non-residential properties. So typically offices, industrial plants, and stores will be excluded from the IME. Once again, an aggravated rates for residents in tax havens is foreseen, which is, as you are already aware from these 10 minutes, is very common in Portugal. And the payment of this tax is in September of each year. So you will have to pay the IME in April, June, and November of each year, and then you will have this additional tax that has a limited application, I must say, in September of each year. Then, because life is all much about paying taxes, but also about trying to have some profit or to have some gain from having a real estate. We have, of course, in the last few years, a huge trend for the short-term rental and for the not so for the long-term rental. That's what the government is trying to foster, but mainly for a short-term rental, which is commonly referred to the Airbnb type of rental. So here I want to enter in the taxes that you have during the holding period and taxes that you pay when you try to make some income out of it. Well, typically, when you are engaged in the activity of short-term rental, you are placed under what we call, for personal income tax purposes, the category B type of income. In case you have an annual income below 200,000 euros, you will be put under what we call the simplified regime. Under the simplified regime, only a fraction of your income is taxed, and the rest is considered as expenses. So, as I explained on this slide, when you rent an apartment, for instance, on a short-term activity, only 35% of your income will be taxed, and the rest will be considered expenses. There is an exception, however, for what has been called as containment areas, which is typically the center of Lisbon and the center of Porto. Due to the housing crisis, the government has created a system whereby people that have properties in the big city centers are somehow penalized for having them in the short-term rental market, because there is a housing crisis and the government considers that it should be used for long rental purposes or for the house for a permanent abode. So there is this aggravated coefficient depending on the location of the property. But typically, what will happen is that only a portion of your income will be taxed and will be taxed at progressive tax rates. The progressive personal income tax rates typically range from 14.5 to 48% in mainland Portugal. 48% apply to a relatively low amount of income, which is about 79,000 euros. And this can be added by a solidarity tax rate that apply only to the excess above 80,000 euros to 250k of 2.5%, and then above 250k of 5%. In case it's a non-resident, 25% flat tax rate will apply. So in a nutshell, under this simplified regime, you have this good value of having a minor portion of your income tax, but then you can be a bit limited in the amount of expenses that you deduct. It depends on a case-by-case analysis, and you have the taxation at progressive tax rates that can be a bit high. For long-term rental, so in case you decide to rent your house for the long term, your income will be, in a nutshell, the gross rental income minus deductible expenses. So deductible expenses have been the cause of litigation with the tax authorities because they have a strict interpretation of what can be considered a deductible expense. Because under the law, the deductible expense must be documented and be effectively incurred and necessary to obtain the income from the immovable property. However, the tax authorities consider this to be very strict, and there has been litigation of whether it's deemed as necessary to obtain the income, whether it's properly documented, etc. But the basic principle is this. The taxable income from long-term rental will depend on is subject to rates that depend on the duration of the contract. The general rates nowadays is of 28%, but in a few days with the housing package of the government that is intended to foster long-term rental and the housing market, the rates will be reduced to 25%. So we can already consider this 25% to apply to long-term rental contracts between up until 2 years, up until 5 years, sorry. Then for contracts between 5 to 10 years, the rate is expected to be of 15%. For contracts for 10 to 20 years, the rate will be of 10%. And for contracts above 20 years, the rate will be of 5%. Well, this is attractive, maybe, but the downside is that it will only apply to contracts that are signed after the entry in force of this new housing package or after a renovation. So for contracts above 20 years, it will be very interesting. But the key factor is, although I do not have official data, is that there's a minor portion of contracts in Portugal, of rental contracts in Portugal, that are above 20 years. So that, well, that would be a matter and a subject for a long discussion. I just inserted here a note that whenever the property is owned by a Portuguese company, so in case the investor decides to acquire the property through a company and not under its own name, the profits will be taxed according to the standard corporate income tax rates, which are 21% in mainland Portugal and 14% in Madeira, 14.7% in Madeira. This is not a mistake. Madeira really has a 30% reduction in its general tax rate, and that applies to profits of a standard company. Moreover, long-term rental is also exempt from VAT, or generally exempt from VAT, unless there's an option of being waived, which is not usually the case. On the opposite, short-term rental, you will have to charge VAT to your guests, usually at the 6% tax rate, and you will have a more burdensome, or at least one more tax obligation, which is to charge VAT and submit VAT tax returns. There is an exemption for annual income below 13.5K, but usually this is the case. Finally, we go to the taxes upon the sale. So in case in the future you grow tired of your house, or you want to acquire a new one, you are of course free to sell it. And there is a new regime as from the 1st of January of this year. In the old days, and this was a long discussion in Portugal, there was a different treatment for residents and non-residents on the sale of real estate. But further to some cases on the European Court of Justice, where Portugal was deemed to have an illegal regime for non-residents, the Portuguese government opted to solve the issue by equivalent the tax regime applied to residents and to non-residents upon the sale of Portuguese real estate. So basically what the law provides now, regardless of the residence, is that capital gains from the sale of movable assets are taxed at 50% of their value. So 50% will be taxed, 50% will not be taxed. The gain will be aggregated to the other annual income of the taxpayer to compute the general progressive tax rates that will apply. As I said, the general progressive tax rates go from 14.5 to 48% plus the solidarity rate. What is the downside, I would say, the complexity of this aspect is that to compute the applicable tax rates to non-residents will be obliged to declare all of their income in Portugal. Otherwise, there might be a case of not computing and not reaching the correct tax bracket and correct tax rates. So, although foreign income will not be taxed in Portugal, in case you are a non-resident, you will still be obliged to fill in the Portuguese tax return with your worldwide income, just for the purposes of calculating the tax rate that will apply in Portugal over the sale of the real estate. So there's an additional layer of complexity that was added to the Portuguese personal income tax return starting as from next year, because this applies as from 1st of January of 2023. So first tax returns will be delivered between April and June of next year. Some exceptions. Well, there is the capital gains rollover in case they are reinvested in the acquisition or construction of another primary residence within the European Union or the EEA within 36 months of the sale or 24 months before. This is subject to a case-by-case analysis because it's a very complex regime, and once again, it's going to be amended in the next few days according to the new legislative package to benefit from this capital gains exemption. The house, the asset that is sold must have been your tax residence in the previous 2 years. So there's this obligation or there will be this anti-abuse provision that is very relevant. And so, although this is, of course, worth exploring, we should be mindful that it's subject to strict requirements. But in any case, very beneficial. And also, there's the possibility of having the capital gains rolled over if the taxpayer is aged 65 or more, or if it's retired, and reinvests the proceed in a life insurance contract, for instance, or pension fund within 6 months of the sale. This was, of course, the case for individuals. For the case of real estate asset that is in the hands of a company, capital gains will be taxed at the standard corporate income tax rates. In case it's a resident, the company is resident in Portugal or in Madeira. And for non-resident companies, it will be taxed at 25% rate, according to the rate provided by the corporate income tax code. So with this, I finish my presentation. This is a brief presentation of what NEWCO does instead corporate services, relocation services, including visas, etc., and real estate. The part of real estate getting a golden visa is going to become obsolete in a matter of days, as I just explained. But in a nutshell, that's where we assist our clients. That's all for now. I hope I hadn't taken you too much time. And thank you once again to all of you for this opportunity of sharing some tax thoughts on this morning.
Thank you very much, Roberto Rogerio. That was quite an intensive nutshell, I would say. Thank you very much for all the information. Question time. Dear guests, any questions, please use the time we still have to ask our specialists. If there are no questions as of yet, I would have a question. It's maybe a bit technical. It's maybe still a bit obsolete, but it refers to the, let's say, important subject of the Mais Habitação package. And the question refers to the funds, to the investment funds. So according to the Mais Habitação, as we understand, the investment funds then that invest in real estate in Portugal, the investors would not be entitled to the golden visa or ARE. But how about the investment funds up to 500,000 that invest or capitalize the companies registered in Portugal, which invest in real estate? This model would entitle the investor of the investment fund to the ARE golden visa.
Rogério, do you want to have a go? Do you want me to answer?
Well, you can answer, but I can add you something after maybe.
Okay. Well, Wojciech, as you know, this housing package has used the golden visa also as, I wouldn't say the scapegoat, but as being the devil in this housing crisis. So what happened is that the government inserted a provision whereby a fund that is used as an investment for the golden visa cannot invest directly or indirectly in real estate. So there is this this provision that leaves us with little room to the fund make any kind of investment. So it will not be eligible. On the other hand, what might happen is that in case the funds are used in the option, for instance, to capitalize a company that is in the interior regions, there can be a reduction of the amount of investment that is done for the golden visa. So the golden visa can be a bit cheaper than it was in the past for the real estate option. But for real estate, in my view, and what I've been saying to our clients, is that it's better to not risk, and I believe that even the funds will not risk, or they will not see any chance of having any kind of real estate investment, because it will be a huge risk for them, even if it's indirectly. The law is clear when providing that it cannot have such type of investment. Don't know if you agree, Rogério?
I completely agree. It's this the law foresees the direct investment and the investment indirectly, and I'm completely agree with this opinion of Roberto, and we are advising the same to our clients. Exactly that.
Thank you very much. That was somehow not very clear for us. Thank you very much for quite a clear opinion on that. Well, I don't see any questions from our public. So once again, I would like to thank Rogério and Roberto and all your teams for being present today. This is the first one in the series of webinars we will do. Next year, the Chamber is planning the real estate event in September in Warsaw, the second edition, where we would like to have both Portuguese real estate mediators present and Polish real estate mediators to make them meet, to make them cooperate. So wait for that. You will know about that. As for this session, I consider it finished. Thank you very much, and dear speakers, see you in Portugal, see you in Lisbon and Madeira. Thank you very much.
Bye.
See you soon. See you soon, Vasia. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rogério. Pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for both.
Bye-bye.